I have never been so hopeful that things are actually going to change, even after Bryan Kohberger entered a guilty plea in the Idaho 4 case, as I am today. Why? Because I am seeing a major shift in the narrative, a major shift where mainstream media is finally starting to ask questions that they've never dared to ask before. Let's get into it. The devil's in the details. Let's go. Now, if you haven't done so already, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. We do a lot of really cool things on this channel. We've made a big difference, and a lot of the early things that I said in this case are starting to bear fruit for the mainstream media as well. Some of the things that I've been saying for over a year, some of the things that some of you out there who've been covering this case for 3 years said 3 years ago. Finally, mainstream media is saying, hey, what didn't happen the way that you said it did? As if it was their idea, as if we haven't been saying this for years. Comes now Megyn Kelly, comes now Jesse Weber, and others like Howard Bloom and others. We're going to talk about several of the mainstream media people that have changed their opinion just ever so slightly, where the narrative is now shifting, where we start to ask questions. Hey, maybe the story didn't make sense. For God's sake, man. I told you that when I first started a year ago on this channel, and everybody else has been telling you that for years, but now you're going to give us permission. Now, I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to show some things on screen. And I'm saying take a risk because copyright violations could come in, even though it's on YouTube. But if I'm borrowing somebody else's content, I have to be super, super careful. So I'm going to take a risk that we can pull away with this, and I'm going to try to comment as much as possible by pausing every 5 to 10 seconds, which might be annoying, but I have lots of things to say. I want to show you, first of all, the Megyn Kelly interview with Howard Bloom. For those of you who are not aware, let me break this down for you one more time. Howard Bloom wrote When the Night Comes Falling in the Idaho 4 case. Howard Bloom, because of the book he wrote, was featured on documentary after documentary. At least 2, if not 3 documentaries I watched had Howard Bloom on there, referenced as the one who wrote the book When the Night Comes Falling, and was considered an expert. And he always came in to tell you that Bryan Kohberger was the sole killer, and this is how he did it. From Howard Bloom's investigation, where he came out to Pullman and Moscow and spent boots on the ground for weeks interviewing everybody. And we believe, or he wants you to believe that he did a thorough investigation, and Bryan Kohberger is the guy, and here's why he did it. And that was When the Night Comes Falling. Now, I did a full review on my channel of When the Night Comes Falling. We read every single chapter, and I give you my opinions of every single chapter. There were some big moments in Howard Bloom's book, despite a lot of it was just kind of suspect blaming. So the suspect's Bryan Kohberger, so I'm going to tell you all the reasons why they got the suspect right. That was most of the book, but there were some moments where he showed that he had problems with the official narrative. And by the way, kudos to Pavarotti, J. Embree, who said the same thing I'm going to tell you right now. Careful what you guys ask for when you bust the nuts of Howard Bloom for changing his opinion. I did it too, but we should be careful. Like Pavarotti said, and he's absolutely right. When mainstream media starts to finally ask better questions, it would behoove us to say, congratulations, thank you for paying attention to this, keep going, rather than shut the hell up. We were asking those questions years ago. We could be angry. We have a right to be angry. We've been shunned. We've been ostracized. We've been victim shamed. We've been called victim shamers or whatever. The point being is we've been attacked by mainstream media, so it would be natural for us to attack them back. But in reality, I kind of agree with Pavarotti. We should more be thankful you're finally starting to ask the questions. And rather than be a dick about it, we should encourage that. Keep asking questions. You're finally asking some of the right questions. So let's get into Megyn Kelly talking to Howard Bloom about a news article he just recently came out with. And this is shifting the narrative all over mainstream media, where they're saying, hey, wait a minute. Maybe the timeline doesn't make sense. Maybe Bryan Kohberger did it, but maybe he didn't do it alone. In fact, maybe Bryan Kohberger didn't do it at all and somebody else did it, but he just helped. Wow. Those are things that we've been saying for a long time. And now they're finally, and also what I've been saying is, if you said Bryan Kohberger did it alone and he didn't, that means the real killer is walking free. Again, something I've said for forever. And by the way, before I get too far, and I feel like I've already gone too far, there's going to be a major piece towards the middle to end of this. We're going to end with an interview by the Sarge, another YouTuber, former, police officer, NYPD kind of guy. I think he's NYPD, who has his own true crime channel, and he interviewed Brent Turvey. Huge name in the Idaho 4. You want to catch this. What Brent Turvey says will blow your ass away. You need to listen to it. I'm going to cover it. I'm going to try to talk about as much as possible about who Brent Turvey is and why his comments towards the middle to finish us out on this video is a bombshell of explaining what happened in Idaho 4. But first, let's start with how the narrative is shifting in America through mainstream media sources like, if you want to call Megyn Kelly, mainstream media, and News Nation, mainstream media. Let's get into it.
We are back now with journalist Howard Bloom talking about Bryan Kohberger and why Howard believes now, having seen the crime scene photos and done some other investigation, that Bryan Kohberger may have had an accomplice.
Right off the bat with this lead in, we're going to talk to Howard Bloom, who now says maybe Bryan Kohberger had an accomplice. Oh my God. What have we been saying for forever? This crime couldn't have been done by one man. We've said that for forever. And you said, oh, you're an idiot, DA. They did timing runs. They proved that a person could do that. And yet Howard Bloom said, when Idaho State Police recently released a bunch of crime scene photos, that after looking at the crime scene photos, I have to say, I have more doubts now that this couldn't have been done by one person. Howard Bloom, by the way, also broke down for us about how the timeline always was a little tight for him from the very beginning, but he accepted the logic that they did timing runs and proved that it could be done. And so he said, basically, he should be on my channel. Playing devil's advocates, I thought, well, if everything went perfectly, maybe it could have been done in the time frame they said. However, after seeing the crime scene photos, Howard Bloom said, there's no way that was perfect. That was a sloppy kill. Everything went wrong. And the signs were that did not go according to plan. And if that's the case, then there's no way in hell I think that one person could do all of that in the time frame they have, because the only way it was going to work is if everything went methodical and perfect, and it clearly did not. So let's get into this.
And more than that, Kohberger may have been the accomplice to someone else. Now, Howard, one of the most interesting...
And stop. Listen to what she's saying. Listen to what she's saying. Not only are they now saying, and she's accepting the possibility, and she's smiling like, I've got this new revelation, for fuck's sake. I just dropped the F-bomb. When I do drop the F-bomb, what do? I put on the parental discretion is advised. This is not a children's channel. We drop F-bombs. We talk about blood. We talk about all kinds of things. So now she's going to tell us, wow, what if Bryan Kohberger, and again, she's using Howard Bloom as her source. What if Bryan Kohberger not only didn't do it alone, but what if he wasn't the guy who did it? He was actually helping somebody else who did it. Holy shit. Holy shit. All right, let's keep going. I got to find my mouse and get a better handle on that. All right, here we go.
Positing this possibility is you harken back to the moment Kohberger was taken into custody. And one of the few public statements that he made on the record.
And now we're going to get into a statement that I have to say right off the bat strikes even my panel with arguments. Our panel argues about this all the time. Bryan Kohberger's statement, which Howard Bloom is going to say when he was arrested. We're gonna go ahead and let him rephrase what happened, and then we'll get into it.
Yes, on the night of Kohberger's arrest in his parents' house in Pennsylvania, he's put up in zip ties. His parents and one of his sisters are put in zip ties by the police. He's taken out to a state trooper's car. He's put in the back seat, and the first thing he says to the state trooper is, was anyone else arrested?
And look, I understand people are going to say that never happened. I've got people on my panel, like Dago from True Crime Cafe, who says That never happened. That was a complete fiction by Brian Enton. Brian Enton's the one that said it. And people have reminded me that Bryan Kohberger's attorney in Pennsylvania, he had an attorney for a short period of time in Pennsylvania before he got extradited back to Idaho. His attorney said Bryan Kohberger did not say those words. That was said by a reporter. However, one must understand as well, it is possible Bryan Kohberger's attorney is the one who's incorrect, that Bryan Kohberger could have said it. It was reported by, again, a news reporter. It was repeated by different people. Howard Bloom went and did research. And so Howard Bloom believes, as some other people, including myself, that the statement may actually have been said. So yes, I understand. Bryan Kohberger's attorney may have actually said in Pennsylvania that Bryan Kohberger didn't say those words. However, other people said that they heard him say it. A news reporter repeated what he heard was said. So take it for a grain of salt on whether Bryan Kohberger said the infamous words when he was first arrested, has anybody else been arrested for this crime? And the reason why it stuck with me when I first heard it and why it stuck with many people was it suggested to us, not Howard Bloom or fucking News Nation or anybody else, but to us, when we heard, has anybody else been arrested? The first question in my mind was, oh, there are other accomplices. But Howard Bloom will tell you what we all thought in mainstream media, because they buy the fucking narrative that gets told to them by law enforcement. That's just the way shit works with mainstream media. Sorry, I'm getting angry, but I get angry about this stuff. They thought it just meant, is my family being arrested? Is my dad being arrested? Is my mom being arrested? Is my sister being arrested for this murder? No, he wasn't fucking asking that. I never thought he was asking that. But Howard Bloom says, hey, we all thought, I don't know who we are, but mainstream media thought he must have been talking about his family when he asked, has anybody else been arrested? A lot of us, including myself, thought the first question was, oh, there are other accomplices. And that would make sense, because that crime didn't happen with one person killing 4 people on 2 floors in about 8 to 9 minutes. We all knew that was a problem. And so we knew there was possible accomplices. And so when Bryan Kohberger said that, and by the way, let me remind you, if you haven't seen me talk about this before, the very first video I ever did on Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho 4 situation was on TikTok. And it was the question, what if Bryan Kohberger was simply the getaway driver? What if he never actually went into the house? What if he drove somebody there and somebody else went into the house, committed the crimes, and then Bryan Kohberger picked him up and left with them because he was the getaway driver? That was the first question I ever asked, because I knew from the very beginning, more than likely there was accomplices, and it was more than one person that went into the house that night. So let's continue with this interview.
And at the time, no one really paid too much attention to this. We thought he was being the dutiful son concerned about his parents or his sister.
No, Howard Bloom. No, it is not true. None of us thought he was talking about anybody but his family. No, actually a whole fucking bunch of us out there in YouTube land and true crime community on TikTok and other social media platforms immediately thought Bryan Kohberger was referring to accomplices. All of us thought that. So your statement that nobody thought he was talking about anything other than his own family, you're full of shit. I'm sorry. You know what? Look, and I don't mean to be mean to Howard Bloom, because again, like Pavarotti said, thank goodness Howard Bloom has stated, maybe now I think there actually was accomplices. That's a step in the right direction. And mainstream media people will interview Howard Bloom and say, hey, what about this crazy theory you've got that maybe there's accomplices? Okay, whatever. Let's be a little kind, because at least he's mentioning it and it's getting airtime. And so maybe you have to hear it from this guy.
Aspects of the case. When you look at what occurred that night, whether one man could have done it, this question, has a more ominous.
So even Howard Bloom now, again, Howard Bloom's going to tell you, despite writing a book, When the Night Comes Falling, the Requiem for the Idaho 4 murders, how Bryan Kohberger did it and did it alone. And even what he was thinking in his head when he decided to go in and finally do the killing, that he had to work himself up. Like, he literally tells you a whole psychological profile of what Bryan Kohberger was doing, is he worked up the nerve to do it all by himself. He told you that in his book. Then he went on documentaries Dateline, NBC, and all these other specials to talk about, I'm an expert, and here's how Kohberger definitely did it all by himself, and here's how he did it. Now he's going to tell us, I've always questioned whether or not one person could have done that. From the very beginning, I've always questioned it. And yes, as Pavarotti pointed out, if you read his book thoroughly, you will see he did raise questions in his own book while simultaneously telling you, but this is probably how it happened. All right, let's go.
Echo. Was anyone else arrested? It raises the possibility
Yes.
that someone else is out there right now. And
And again, he's got a great point. If you got it wrong, if Bryan Kohberger had an accomplice and you took the easy answer that he did it by himself, which most of us, I think in the true crime sphere who follow this case on YouTube and stuff like that, we knew this wasn't a one-person crime from the very beginning, or at least we strongly felt. Again, I even have to play devil's advocate to myself and say, is it possible? Maybe possible. But if you tell me that if I'm being logical, there's no way in hell it happened the way they said it. That's why I keep saying all the time. I can tell you this, it didn't happen the way they said it did, because that doesn't make any logical sense. And so he brings up the point that I've been bringing up a million times. This is why I have to pause and do my own rant, because I can't get copyright strikes for showing you. I'm showing you him because maybe you'll listen to Howard Bloom. Maybe you'll listen to Megyn Kelly on the Megyn Kelly Show. Maybe you'll listen to Jesse Weber. Maybe you'll listen to Brent Turvey. Maybe you'll listen to somebody else, because you're just obviously not listening to me. And not you, because you're listening to me because you're watching my show right now. But a lot of people won't listen to me, and they'll say that I'm nuts. So maybe if you hear it from a talking head that you're used to and you trust, it's okay now to finally say, oh shit, maybe more than one person did this. And maybe if you put Bryan Kohberger away for a simple plea of I did it by myself, that means the real killers, the other killers, are walking free. That's the ultimate conclusion he's coming to.
we go to the
It really is an odd question when you think about it. You know, if Kohberger, we know he committed the crime, but
I love her. Well, we know he committed the crime. No, you literally just said one of his theories is that Kohberger might not have actually committed the crime. Somebody else might have committed the crime, and he was just an accomplice helping out, as Howard Bloom suggested. Maybe he was trying to show off for a friend his book smarts on how to cover up the crime that was committed. So Howard Bloom's actually positing, as she said, that Kohberger could have maybe not even done it at all. But she's like, well, we all know Kohberger did it. Why do we know that, Megyn Kelly? Because you fuckers in mainstream media, sorry, I don't mean to call Megyn Kelly a fucker. I don't know her personally. So I'm trying to calm down. Rhetorically, you in mainstream media told us all that he did it, and they told us all he did it. And so you keep saying, well, we know he did it because we told you he did it. All right, whatever.
let's assume if he had done it totally by himself with no accomplice, why would that be the first question you asked investigators?
Oh, that damn, Megyn Kelly, that's a great question. If he really had done it by himself, like he fucking said he did at the plea deal, and we all said, why are you still talking about this case? He pled guilty and he told you he did it alone. But gee, now that I'm thinking about it, it would be strange for him to ask if anybody else has been arrested if he did it by himself. I guess now we should start thinking about that question. Huh. Well, again, I'm glad that we are asking the question. To be fair, I am glad we're asking the question. Let's keep going.
Yeah, it certainly is a troubling one. And there's more evidence that makes this question even eerier. On the knife sheath, which we know has Kohberger's DNA on it, a little bit of touch DNA.
So first of all, I disagree. We don't know it has Kohberger's DNA on it. We don't know that. The DNA science, by the way, is complete fuckery. If you read the documents, you will find that the prosecution never intended to submit the DNA into evidence. They never intended to show it, I should say, at court to a jury. They knew they were in trouble with the DNA. And most of America, most of the world has missed that. Most of the world continues to repeat over and over again, Bryan Kohberger's DNA was all over that crime scene, or Bryan Kohberger's DNA was at the house. Well, again, let me reiterate for those who are just tuning in to this channel, let me reiterate. Bill Thompson, the lead prosecutor, literally said on the day of Kohberger's plea deal where he accepted that he was guilty, said verbatim, we can't place Bryan Kohberger at the house. We can only place him near the house. So juxtaposition that shit with his DNA was in the house. If Bryan Kohberger's DNA was in the house, then how would they not be able to place Bryan Kohberger in the house? But Bill Thompson literally told you at the plea, at the sentencing, at the plea, I should say, at the plea change to guilty, we can't place. We would never be able to place Bryan Kohberger at the house. The best we can do is we can place him near the house. He told you that, and most of you ignored it. They weren't going to show the DNA, people. They weren't going to show the DNA was full of shit. It was going to be torn apart at trial. which is why, in my opinion, we didn't have a trial, because they knew it was going to fall apart. And if they got an offer for a plea deal, they took it immediately, because they were screwed if they went to trial, because the DNA wasn't going to place Kohberger at the house. Bloom's going to tell us it did, but he's going to say now that there's some problems with the knife sheath. So let's continue.
On the button snap, that was a cornerstone of the state's case against him.
Yeah, it was a cornerstone. It was, but it was junk science because it wasn't going to hold up. That's my contention. If you read the documents, an expert told the prosecution, please don't want to use that DNA evidence at trial. It's not going to hold up. And so they told Ann Taylor and other people, don't worry, we don't even intend to use the DNA at trial. We've got enough circumstantial evidence to convict Kohberger without the DNA. So don't worry. Because here's the thing, listen. Ann Taylor said, you must show us how you developed Bryan Kohberger's name from the DNA. It's our constitutional right. A defendant has the constitutional right to see the evidence that you got against him and how you developed it. And they told her, we don't want to show you our work. And she said, you have to. And they said, well, you know what? Never mind. We don't even intend to show the DNA at trial. It's not necessary. We've got enough circumstantial evidence on Kohberger. We don't need to show the DNA. So we don't have to show you how we got it, because we're not even going to use that evidence. And you all missed it. Most of you missed that. That was part of the argument. We're not going to use the DNA, so we don't have to show you how we got to Kohberger's name. And yet, in a court of public opinion, Bryan Kohberger was convicted because his DNA was at the crime scene. Let's continue.
But there now is, according to the documents that have been released, there's unknown Y DNA on it, a speck of that. Y DNA is male DNA.
And it's not a speck. It's not a speck, Howard Bloom. There's mixed blood on the knife sheath that has Y chromosome DNA, meaning a male. Listen carefully. Listen. Unknown male blood. A male's blood is found on the knife sheath. And they tested that blood on the knife sheath to various alternative suspects that Ann Taylor said, well, there's 4 suspects, alternative suspects, that we think could have been involved in that crime. Maybe as alternate perpetrators or extra people who were there, accomplices maybe even. And they tested the blood on the back of the knife sheath that was mixed male DNA and excluded all of Ann Taylor's 4 alternate suspects. What they didn't explain to you, and you need to use your common sense, is that it also excluded Bryan Kohberger. I assure you, use your brain. If the Y DNA, the male DNA on the knife sheath, the blood, not the little skin cell that was impossible to see with the human eye, that's what they had on Kohberger, a skin cell or a nanograms worth or whatever the fuck it was, really, really tiny, can't see it with the human eye, speck of DNA on the button snap. That's what they had on Kohberger. The blood, the mixed blood of an unknown male is also not Kohberger's. Kohberger was excluded from contributing to the male blood on the knife sheath. Are you listening? And so now Howard Bloom's going to tell you, and Megan's going to tell us it's okay to now question. Wow, that's interesting. Fuck, we told you that when this came out. Why weren't you listening to anybody? Let's continue.
They say in the documents that they ran it against Kohberger, they ran it against other males who had been in the house and been suspects, and they could not identify.
Listen, Howard Bloom, I'm not going to say he's an expert. I'm not going to say he's the definitive source, but Howard Bloom just told you they ran that male DNA, the male blood DNA on the knife sheath. They ran it against Bryan Kohberger, and they could not match it to Bryan Kohberger. They could not match it to any of Ann Taylor's alternate suspects, which means it's the blood of a male who they don't know who it belongs to. And I'll tell you why. And Brent Turvey coming up when we give you the shocker at the end of this video, Brent Turvey will tell you the reason why they didn't match it with anybody is because law enforcement stops looking. They stop looking for anyone once they've decided who they want for a crime. That's how law enforcement typically works. Brent Turvey, a forensic specialist, who does this and written 20 books and teaches college courses and all that shit on it, tells you that's how it works. Once law enforcement has decided who they want, they stop looking. So no, they weren't going to test that blood all day long to find somebody that might match up to it, because it didn't fit the narrative that Bryan Kohberger did it. What they had was a speck of DNA the size of a freaking grain of sand that you can't see with the human eye. That's what they had, and that's what they were going to go with. And it didn't matter who the blood belongs to. That's a moot question, because it wouldn't help the investigation to find out whose blood it was. So they didn't look.
What they didn't...
Wait, on the knife sheath?
Yes, on the knife sheath.
And I love Megyn Kelly's reaction. There was blood on the knife sheath? What were you... Where the fuck have you been for 3 years? Where the hell have you been? What is wrong with you? Oh, there was male blood on the knife sheath? Now, again, I'm glad mainstream media is starting to ask questions. I'm glad they're starting to say, hey, that seems important. There was some other person's blood on the knife sheath and it wasn't Bryan Kohberger's? Whose was it? That's a great question, Megan. It's a great question. Thanks for asking.
What they didn't do is compare this little speck. Maybe it's too small. I don't know why they didn't do this, but they didn't compare it to the blood samples they had found previously, which they never investigated, on the handrail and on a glove outside.
Man, listen, please, if you're a guilter and you're right now, you're furious because I'm saying Bryan Kohberger might not have done it by himself, and that just makes you furious. Listen to Howard Bloom. He's telling you the same thing I've been telling you. So if I'm the asshole, he's also the asshole. Now he's telling you, why didn't they test the unknown blood, the specks of unknown blood on the back of the knife sheath to the unknown male DNA inside the house on the banister, that they said, well, we didn't test it because it was irrelevant. We decided it wasn't. Basically, they said it wasn't our guy. So we knew it wasn't Kohberger's, so we didn't care to look at who it might belong to. Oh, and there was a bloody glove with blood in it outside in the parking lot. You know what? That's irrelevant because it wasn't Bryan Kohberger, and therefore we don't care who it belongs to because it wasn't Kohberger. And so even Howard Bloom is saying, gee, why didn't you at least test the blood on the knife sheath to see if the blood on the knife sheath found right underneath a body of Maddie Mogen? Why didn't you test the blood there to see if it matched the blood on the banister you said that wasn't part of the crime scene, or the blood on the glove outside that you said wasn't part of the crime scene? The reason why they say they didn't test the banister blood of unknown male B inside the house, another person who's not Bryan Kohberger, by the way, who left blood at the crime scene. The reason why they said they didn't test it, they said it was too far away from the crime scene. The banister was leading down to the first floor. And because we know Bryan Kohberger left on the second floor out the back door and didn't go down the first floor, that blood cannot be his. Therefore, it's too far away from the crime scene. That's what they told you, and that's fucking horseshit. Because again, they've already assumed for you, or presumed for you, presumed. Anyways, they already presumed for you that Bryan Kohberger did it, and then he went out the back door. So therefore, if they find any blood anywhere where they don't think it should belong, they just say it's not relevant. It's not part of the crime scene. That's what they really said. Instead of saying, hey, maybe there was more than one killer and maybe one of them went down the fucking front steps and out the door and left a bloody glove out front, they said, nope, not possible, because we know Bryan Kohberger did it and he did it alone. So therefore, that blood doesn't need to be tested. It's irrelevant. The blood outside of the glove is irrelevant. Yet, what Howard Bloom was pointing out, and most people are missing, still to this day, most people are missing, is the knife sheath was found under the body of Maddie Mogen, supposedly. So that's right in the fucking crime scene. That is right in the crime scene. So you tested the blood right at the crime scene, the knife sheath found literally under a body of one of the victims. That's as into the crime scene as you can possibly get. And you determined that that blood on the knife sheath wasn't Bryan Kohberger's. So now maybe you should have tested it to the blood on the banister or the blood outside of the bloody glove, but you didn't. Why? It makes no sense. And even Howard Bloom says that doesn't make sense. And Megyn Kelly might say, you know what? Maybe that doesn't make sense. I'm glad we're asking the question.
Sometimes you don't ask questions because you don't want to know the answers.
Oh, really? If you guys watch my show, that's something I say all the time. All the time. Have you heard me say it? If you watch my show, you have. You know what you do? You don't ask questions you already know the answers to. Or, as Howard Bloom said, you don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. That's what he just said. The reason why they may not have tested the blood on the knife sheath to the blood on the banister or the bloody glove is they don't ask questions you don't want the answer to. And that's what we're going to end with on this video with Brent Turvey, the forensic specialist that Ann Taylor brought in to say, and by the way, Brent Turvey, I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit in case you're hanging on by a thin thread and going, I don't know if I can handle all the way to the end. Brent Turvey was the expert that came on for Ann Taylor, who said that this crime was likely done by multiple perpetrators, accomplices that used multiple weapons, and possibly the killings happened on both floors at the same time. That's what Brent Turvey said. He was expert analysis, 20 books, teaches class on forensics, said this crime was done by multiple perpetrators, likely using multiple weapons. And that's my professional opinion. And people treated him like a conspiracy theorist, but you're going to be able to see his own words. You tell me if that guy sounds like a fucking conspiracy theorist. You watch what he says. If we try to get away without a copyright violation, you watch what he says when he's talking to Sarge about how law enforcement becomes narrow-sighted. And once they decided, this is what Brent, I'm going to give a teaser. What Brent Turvey will tell you is once law enforcement decides who they want for a crime, they stop looking. They don't test the blood on the knife sheath to the blood on the banister or the bloody glove outside because they don't want that answer. It doesn't fit the narrative. Bryan Kohberger did it, and he did it alone, and that's the fucking narrative we're going with. They don't want the answer, so they don't test the DNA. And they don't do investigations, and that's how law enforcement often works. Listen, when we get to Brent Turvey, he'll tell you flat out, and he's an expert that does this all the time, works with law enforcement all the time. He knows what he's talking about, and he tells you they stop looking when they decide who they want, and they wanted somebody for this, and that's what they went with. Let's go.
When I was, talking to people in law enforcement about this theory, many people didn't want to talk, but one person who's very knowledgeable about the case wound up telling me, said, look, this case is all wrapped up. We wanted it to go away, and now it's going away, and we're not going to poke into it anymore.
This is the same thing we're going to end on. This is the same thing. Brent Turvey is going to tell you the same thing. Once they decide who they want for the crime, they don't want to look anymore. Howard Bloom just told you. He didn't give a name. He just told you. When I was talking to people in law enforcement, they told me, look, this thing is done. We already have our answer. We already know who we want. We don't want any other answers. This is what we're going to go with. That's what they told him. That's what Brent Turvey's going to tell you law enforcement does. Once they decide who they want for somebody, they stop investigating and they just paint the narrative to fit what they want to go. It's done. We're going to wrap it up. We want this closed. That's what he was saying. That's what somebody told him on the inside. We want this closed. We want it to go away. We want it over. We've got a guy. Good enough. Let's continue.
But there's a lot of things that we don't know and will never know. The question is, do the Idaho state taxpayers, do the public, do the families want to leave those questions hanging out there?
And apparently they do. Apparently they do. Now, I don't know about Idaho State Police. I have my suspicions that Idaho State Police wants to break this case. Idaho State Police, in my opinion, keeps making mistakes where they leak shit to the public that they're not supposed to leak. That is leading people like Howard Bloom to say, well, shit. You weren't supposed to show that, but now that I've seen it, I don't think it happened the way that they said it did. And I think that may not be a mistake on the part of Idaho. Maybe somebody at Idaho State Police, in my opinion, has a conscience and wants the public to get wind of this so that we start asking the right questions. And maybe Howard Bloom is the kind of guy who's going to finally be somebody that you can respect enough, I guess, not people in our channel because they don't seem to really like Howard Bloom. I'm sorry, Howard Bloom. I don't know you personally. You might be a great guy, but my people don't really like you all that much, to be fair. But anyways, the point being is that maybe now that some people in the world respect Howard Bloom, him saying, hey, maybe we should relook at this, we'll let you relook at that. But the other question that he asked is, shouldn't the families want to know the truth? Apparently fucking not. And I'll tell you why. Because all the families continue to do is tell everybody that we should be ashamed for asking questions. This is over. Let the kids have closure. Let the families have closure. They don't want the answer. In fact, they've got a $500 million lawsuit against WSU to say that WSU should have stopped Bryan Kohberger because he's the only guy that did it. I would argue that those families are actually a little afraid about any kind of alternate suspect coming out at this point because it would shoot the culpability of WSU to not stop the lone killer if he wasn't the lone killer. Or maybe he didn't do it at all. The lawsuit may be fucked if you find out that the story, the narrative that they painted wasn't true. So I'm not sure the families at this point do want the answers, Howard Bloom. I'm not sure that they do. I thought they did. This is what I told everybody on my channel. I'm sorry, I'm ranting and I'm yelling and I'm pissed off. Hopefully you lower the volume a little bit because I'm fucking fired up. But I told you this before. I thought if it was my family member, I would want to know the truth. I would want to make sure they got the right guy to go away. Furthermore, and more importantly, I've said this over and over again, even if you, the family, believe in your heart, that Bryan Kohberger was one of the killers, if he wasn't the only killer and somebody helped him, I would want all the sons of bitches that killed my family member to go to jail. I want all of them to go to jail, not just one of them. I would want all of them, because somebody who actually stabbed your child might not be Bryan Kohberger. Maybe it was one of the accomplices. And maybe the person who actually murdered your child isn't the guy behind jail. I would want the guy who actually did it behind jail. But I'm not sure anymore. I thought that's what we were doing. I thought we were pressing for truth. We wanted to get justice for the victims and for the families. But the families keep telling us that we should shut the hell up and go with the narrative. And by the way, as another teaser, Brent Turvey will tell you, this is a shocker, Brent Turvey will tell you himself, again, a forensic specialist will tell you, law enforcement will actually threaten families if they try to ask questions that shake the narrative that they're going with. The families of the victims, law enforcement will actually arrest the families of the victims for questioning the official narrative. Wait till you get to that part. Let's continue.
Right. I mean, if it's true, there's another vicious serial killer roaming free. So it seems worth a question or two.
Oh, Megan does think, hey, if Bryan Kohberger didn't do it alone, then maybe there is another killer going free. And it seems like it's a good question. Funny, because I've been told I'm a piece of shit, worthless human being for asking that question. Maybe there was more than one killer. Have we ever thought about that? You're a sick son of a bitch. Leave these kids alone. You victim shaming asshole. Let the families have closure. I'm a piece of shit. But now Megan Kelly says, boy, seems like we should want to know if there's a killer out in the loose. I thought so. I thought so as well.
We have now come to understand, per People magazine, that the defense had hired a forensic criminologist named Dr. Brent Tarvey.
Oh, really? So, like I said, we're going to talk about Brent Tarvey. We're going to talk about him at the end of this video, and I'm going to play his thing. She flat out says, the defense hired a forensic specialist, Brent Tarvey. We're going to hear some of his own words, not specifically related to Idaho 4 per se, but it's going to relate to everything in Idaho 4, because he's just talking in general, and it's exactly what we saw happen in Idaho 4.
Who was going to testify for the defense if this case had gone to trial. And this guy, now obviously he's hired by the defense to try to get Bryan Kohberger off the hook. So we take it with a serious grain of salt, but he is raising in this draft testimony that People got its hands on.
And yes, Brent Tarvey is going to question, again, I don't think the crime was done by one person. I think it was done by multiple perpetrators using multiple weapons and possibly on 2 floors at the same time. And by the way, don't forget, they kept leaking that it was possible that Bryan Kohberger used more than one weapon. Even at the sentencing and closure of Bryan Kohberger, when they did a press conference, people were asking, so we've been told there was more than one weapon used. Can you now tell us what it was? And they just waffled. They're like, we're just going to stick by our statement that it was primarily done with one weapon. They even have hinted they know it was done with more than one weapon, but they don't want you to talk about it. They don't want to ask questions because they're done investigating this case. They've got their resolution they wanted. Let's continue.
Some similar questions. And here are a few of them as outlined by the magazine. They say that he argued that one killer could not have contained, for example, both Ethan Chapin and his girlfriend, Xana Kernodle, or rendered the 2 different types of lethal force used on Kaylee Gonsalves, because we know the killer killed Kaylee and Madison first, we believe, on the 3rd floor.
So again, Ann Taylor's forensic specialist said, in his opinion, it couldn't have been done by one person. Now she's going to tell us, Megan Kelly's going to tell us, we know this is what happened. He killed so-and-so first. He killed so-and-so second. Megan's going to tell us what we know happened, while simultaneously talking about how the experts and Howard Bloom, who she's interviewing, say, I don't think it happened that way. But she's going to continue to tell you, well, we know what happened.
Kaylee fought for her life, and Kaylee had a broken nose and many injuries about the face, which we were told were defensive wounds, as she definitely tried to fight him.
And again, let's not forget, Let's not forget that they told us originally all of the victims were sleeping. They got attacked in their sleep. And while they eventually said, okay, well, there was some defensive wounds as well, it was primarily started in their sleep. Maybe they woke up and they started to fight back after they got stabbed a few times. But the story was always they were all asleep. And that explained why one killer could kill 4 people, as they were all drunk off their ass and asleep in bed when the killer came in. He hit them by surprise. And yet it came out, well, maybe they were all fighting back. So then you ask yourself, how the hell does multiple victims fighting back against an assailant, multiple people in each room fighting back against one guy, he can get it all done in 8 minutes or so? Not possible. And that's what Howard Bloom is going to say as well. Well, at least he's thinking that.
And it was Kaylee's injuries that led the authorities at the presser after the plea to say, we believed he used a weapon other than a knife.
And again, Megyn Kelly is admitting. So maybe he used weapons other than a knife, multiple weapons. And then at the sentencing, they say, well, we're still going to go with he used one weapon primarily. And yet Brent Tarvey, who we're going to talk about later on and have a clip from him, will say, no, he was prepared to say multiple perpetrators using multiple weapons, killing on 2 floors at the same time.
And people were like, what? He said, like, there's 2 weapons. That was the first we heard. And then he kind of hedged a little saying, we can't say for sure. Maybe, there was speculation. Was it the butt of the knife? But it seemed to be some sort of blunt forced object to beat Kaylee. Forgive me. These are disturbing details, Howard.
So again, the prosecution admitted there may have been more than one weapon used. Then when people freaked out and said, what do you mean? One guy used more than one weapon? Oh, well, it could have been the same weapon. Maybe he used the butt. They hedged their bets. They leaked that there was multiple weapons used. And then when called on it, they said, well, technically it could be the same weapon. Maybe he just used the butt of the weapon to smash her in the face. And that's what the new narrative became.
I mean, these are questions that are raised and that they didn't follow up on. And then I find that, from the moment they tore down the murder house.
Yeah, they did. They did that too. You're going to trial, right? You're going to trial. The jurors are probably going to want to walk through that house, and do things like, how thin are the walls? Could I hear Xana screaming if I was Dylan next door? If I had this wall between it, would the defense want to say, you know what? Why don't I just go to this extra room and just talk a little loud and tell me if you can hear me over in Dylan's room? Because if you can, then how are we to believe that Xana was fighting back silently? Completely silent, never screamed and never did nothing, just completely silently. Oh, and I know some of you have the answer. Bryan Kohberger must have stabbed each of the victims in the lungs, making it impossible for them to scream because he's that fucking good. So now Bryan Kohberger not only killed 4 people in 8 minutes by himself with a knife, but he stabbed them perfectly in the lungs, each one of them, so that they couldn't scream. That's why Dylan didn't hear them screaming, but heard everything else, like whispering, I'm here to help you. Fuck, people. Are you not even using your brains? Not even using your brains. But anyways, yeah, they tore the house down because they never were going to go to trial. They knew they were never going to go to. I'm beginning to believe they never believed they were going to go to trial. They never intended to use the DNA because it was never going to go to trial, and they never intended to take a jury through the house because it was never going to go to trial. They knew it was never going to go to trial. They had an ace up their sleeve. They were going to get a plea deal, and they knew it, in my opinion.
They wanted this case just to disappear. So many people involved in the case have just wanted to move on. The original police chief couldn't wait to quit his job and move on. The original judge couldn't wait to retire. They tear down, again, the murder house, as I said.
Even Howard Bloom is laughing at the spectacle. Everyone wants this to go away. Everyone is retiring around it. They tore the house down and they got a plea deal. Everyone wants to go away. Everyone wants it to go away. The freaking families apparently want it to go away. Everybody wants it to go away so bad that they stopped investigating this case.
And then they're able, just over a course of a single weekend, after 3 years nearly of legal wrangling, to just settle things without demanding an allocution, without trying to say, we want the answers.
And again, what Howard Bloom is bitching about is after 3 years of wasting our fucking time thinking we're going to trial and that the answers are going to come out, after 3 years of making us believe that maybe we'll see some answers when it goes to trial, they wrangled out a plea deal at the last minute and robbed everyone in the world of seeing the evidence for themselves, to seeing what was happening.
They say, well, Kohberger would never tell us the truth.
Yeah, and look, Howard Bloom's also saying they could have asked. F you people who say, oh, well, you can't compel the defendant to tell you anything during his plea deal. You're right. They can't compel him. They didn't even ask. Nowhere did they ever ask Bryan Kohberger, where's the knife, by the way? Where's the knife? Tell us one thing, anything. Tell us one thing that only the killer would know. They never asked him that. And the answer, when Bill Thompson was taken to task by people who do this for a living on court TV, for example, asked, how come you never asked him for something to prove that he did it? Bill Thompson's response and Hippler's response basically was the same. Well, he's a sociopath. You can't believe anything a sociopath would say. Therefore, it was pointless to ask Bryan Kohberger those questions because you would never be able to believe anything he said anyways. Well, I would beg to differ. If you ask him where the knife is and he tells you where the knife is, it doesn't matter whether you fucking believe him or not. You have the knife. You could have asked where the knife is. And maybe you got the knife, and it doesn't matter whether you believe him or not. If you have the knife, you have the knife. Ask the fucking question. Are you a moron? Ask the question. No. They literally looked you in the eye and said, well, it's pointless to ask Bryan Kohberger anything about this case. You couldn't believe it. And furthermore, I'm never going to get to Brent Tarvey's interview. I'm never going to get to it. Furthermore, they told you this. We didn't want to, oh God, listen carefully. We didn't want to ask Bryan Kohberger for details about the case and about the crime because we were afraid he was going to negate his own plea deal. What the fuck does that mean? Listen what they're saying. If Bryan Kohberger had tried to tell you details of the crime, he probably would have got something wrong that was impossible for him to do, and then his plea deal would be off the table because he would say something. They're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't line up with the evidence in the case. Oh, well, then maybe you didn't do it, and maybe your plea deal is full of shit. That's why they didn't ask him. They literally said, we didn't want to ask Bryan Kohberger to give us details because he might say something that would ruin his own plea deal. In other words, he might say something he didn't actually do, the killer didn't do, and he might get it wrong. So the best course of action is to not ask what he did. You don't ask anything. You don't want to shut the hell up, Kohberger. Just say you did it. We don't want to know we don't want to hear nothing. Because if you say something that was wrong, then people will question whether you really did it or not. So we don't want to know.
Well, either he will tell you where the murder weapon is or he won't. It's pretty cut and dry to ask that question.
That's the same thing I just said. He's either going to tell you where the knife's at or not. It doesn't matter whether you believe him or not. If you have the knife, you have the knife.
And get a clear answer. You will be able to tell you how he knew the young women involved or he didn't. Why they did this, I don't understand.
Almost no one with a brain, Howard Bloom, understands. Almost no one with the brain understands. You're not the only one. Everyone wants, no, freaking guilters don't give a shit. All you keep telling me, the guilters out there, is Bryan Kohberger pled guilty. Why are you still talking about this, you piece of shit? Bryan Kohberger said he did it. But some of us with a brain go, why didn't you ask him for some detail that proves he actually did it? Well, it doesn't matter. He said he did. And my favorite bitch from you people is no one pleads guilty to something they didn't do.
I want to go back to this guy, Dr. Brent Tarvey, because he's raising other good questions along the lines of yours. And he was asking questions about how could Ethan have been killed with Xana? Like he said, it is not reasonable to think that Ethan would have remained in his bed after waking up or being awake while Xana was being attacked in front of him. This evidence and context begin to suggest the existence of a second attacker. Ethan and Xana appear to have been attacked at the same time, so it's inconsistent with the state's theory that these crimes were committed solely by one individual. But Howard, isn't it possible that Bryan Kohberger could have attacked Ethan first, killed him, and then killed Xana? Because you would think he would take out the man before, going after the woman.
And again, this is mainstream. And I don't mind playing devil's advocates. I don't. But this, what Megan's doing is mainstream media's attempt to, isn't there a way for us to still make this Bryan Kohberger alone? Like, we know he did it alone. You're saying maybe he didn't, but isn't there a way to still can't we all just fucking get along? Can't we just all say Bryan Kohberger did it by himself? Isn't there some kind of way that we can dream up a scenario in which, okay, maybe he killed Ethan first, and then maybe this, and then maybe fucking a dog farted and that blurred his vision for a minute. Like, is there any way that we can make this work still and make Bryan Kohberger still the guilty guy? Come on, help me out here. Isn't there a way we could still make this work? Work with me.
See, it's possible, but the way it's been reconstructed now and the way I understand the events is that Xana was literally going up the stairs because she heard the commotion in the third floor bedroom, and then she was going down and Kohberger chased her and then immobilized her. Then he dealt with Ethan, and then she was killed. That's the way it's been explained.
And again,
to me.
It drives me nuts because Howard Bloom is simultaneously telling you now he believes it's possible there was more than one killer in the house. But now he's going to tell us Kohberger chased Xana back down the floor because he was killing on the top floor, and then he chased her down to the second floor. Which one is it? Did Kohberger do it on his own, and you're going to tell us how he did it on his own? Or are you going to say that maybe he didn't do it on his own? Well, that's the confusing part of everyone in America.
But also, Ethan is 6'4". He was a big guy. He was a basketball star in high school, an athlete. It's sort of hard to believe. Also, the house was dark. There are two different floors. There's a long staircase. It takes time to move around. How all this could happen, and by one person, I just don't see it.
Could have been wearing a headlamp. I don't know. He wasn't seen. With the witness who saw him, the roommate Dylan who saw him, did not say he had a headlamp on.
And again, Megyn Kelly, please, is there any goddamn way we could still make this Kohberger? Maybe he was wearing a headlamp. Maybe he put a flashlight on his dick and he was leading the way. I don't care what it is. Come up with a scenario. Help me out, Howard Bloom. There's got to be a way Kohberger could have done it by himself. He could have been wearing. I think Howard Bloom tried to almost laugh like, okay, yeah, maybe he had a headlamp. Whatever makes you fucking sleep better at night. Because we know Bryan Kohberger did it alone. They told us. So you're telling me now that, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't seem to make sense. How could you do it? It was in the dark. Well, maybe he had a headlamp, Megyn. No, Megyn. There's no fucking talk about a headlamp. You're making that shit up. You just reached back and pulled it out of your ass. Oh, wait a minute. Howard Bloom, you're going to counter with it was dark in the room? Maybe he had a headlamp on. Maybe he had clip-on fog lights on his fucking Hyundai Elantra too, because suspect vehicle 1 apparently has fog lights, but Bryan Kohberger's car didn't. So maybe he just put some clip-on fog lights, and maybe he wore a fucking headlamp. Whatever you need to do to make it work, we'll do that.
But let's go back to these two surviving witnesses. They're victims too. This is horrible for them. And yet at the same time, there's a lot we don't know.
Yes, Howard Bloom, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't understand. There's a lot of questions. Thank God you are starting to ask some of those questions. It would be great if maybe you wrote a lot of those questions into your book, the one that was quoted and used in all the documentaries to convict Bryan Kohberger in the court of public opinion. It would have been great if a lot of those questions were asked more thoroughly and bluntly in the book, in my opinion.
A lot we don't understand that raises troubling questions, and it's exacerbated by the fact that when we read the interviews, they keep on changing their story.
Howard Bloom also has to remind you, the eyewitnesses, the people who heard and saw things, keep changing their story. They kept changing their story, but apparently everybody in the world is okay with that. Howard Bloom now is like, well, when you come to think about it, those damn witnesses didn't seem to tell a coherent story. It kept changing all the time. So maybe we should have asked more questions.
One of the questions is where are the bloody footprints? I guess there were not a ton of bloody footprints all over these pictures or the murder scene, Howard. And the question is, who cleaned them up?
Wouldn't it be great if you had asked those questions, mainstream media? Wouldn't it be great if you had asked those questions, mainstream media? Where are all the footprints? When they were telling you what to say with your freaking megaphone mouthpiece from the bully pulpit of everyone's TV when you're like, Bryan Kohberger clearly did it. They got his car pinging off the cell tower that services the house at 1122 King Road residence 20 times. He's got to be stalking the girls. Even after they prosecution themselves tell you there's no evidence he was stalking them at all. But you kept telling everyone the story that they wanted to hear. And now you're like, gee, why didn't we ask questions about the footprints? I don't know. Why didn't you ask questions about the footprints? That was your job, mainstream media. Ask questions. Hold people accountable. Do some investigative journalism. Or leave it to YouTubers and shame us for asking the questions that you're too cowardly to ask. That's what it feels like. Are you too cowardly to ask the questions? So you're just going to shame everyone who did ask the questions? And now that you've been given permission, maybe by Howard Bloom or whatever, to ask the question, gee, why didn't we ask those questions back then?
Or like, let's say Bryan Kohberger was wearing head to toe covering, including booties. Well, those booties would have made footprints. They wouldn't have had treads on them, but they would have made bloody footprints.
Oh, I don't know, Megan. Did Ann Taylor, did the specialist that came in say that there was evidence of a cleanup? Did they say that? There was evidence did one of the witnesses say, I don't think you're going to find any of the DNA of the killer because we cleaned up? Did that get said? It did. It did get said. Multiple people said there was evidence of a cleanup. The latent shoe print, evidence of a cleanup. So, Megan, yeah, they did. They did say that there was evidence that somebody cleaned up. And by the way, how the fuck did they clean up the crime scene in 8 minutes? So now Bryan Kohberger comes into the house, kills 4 people on 2 floors in about 8 to 9 minutes, and has time to clean up and leave no footprints behind because he's that good. And now you're starting to ask the question, gee, where were the footprints? And how much time would it have taken if he cleaned up the footprints?
And if he took off the booties immediately after the murders, he would have had to step through blood. There was so much blood. So either way, there should be bloody footprints. And
Look at the way that Megan's acting like she's really thinking this through. Hey, wait a minute. Now, if he wore booties, he would have had to take them off. And there should have, like she's just now thinking about it. After 3 years in a conviction, you're just now thinking, gee, what about this? Have you ever thought about that? Some of us did think about that a long fucking time ago.
This is, again, one of the things this Brent Tarvey was pointing out. There's an absence of bloody footwear patterns at the scene in general.
It's a very important question. There's this 8-hour gap.
And again, everything these guys are acting like they're coming up with for the first time. Hey, you know what? Now we got to go back and think about something. There's a strange 8-hour gap between when the eyewitnesses called 911. That's still, we don't understand that. And and there is evidence of a cleanup, and there is gee, it would have been great if we had asked these questions before the fucking guilty plea. Would have been great if we had asked those questions.
Between the Kohberger or the assassin being spotted by Dylan Mortensen, and then they're calling the police. The house during that period looks very much as if it were cleaned up. The blood, the footprints, it's not there. If you look at the picture of the knife sheath on the bed, it looks like it's been arranged. Did the police do that?
What, Howard Bloom? Gee, the knife sheath looks like it was placed. Oh, it would have been great if Ann Taylor had said, I think the knife sheath might have been planted. Saying that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was at crime scene doesn't tell you how his DNA got at the crime scene. They're prepared. That was hinted to say that the knife sheath was planted. Many people have said, that knife sheath fucking wasn't there on the first pass. No officer saw it in the first pass. It wasn't later on till Brett Payne came in that he suddenly found the knife sheath where other people had missed it. And then some people said, when you look at the crime scene photos, it looks like that knife sheath is placed there. And Howard Bloom just says, gee, when I look at the knife sheath and the pictures, it looks like it was placed there. Did the police do that? That would have been a great question to ask 3 years ago before he pled guilty.
Or was it done by someone else? These are questions that I think should be answered. And I think
I think so too. Thank you. I think so too, Howard Bloom. I think those questions should be answered. I really do. But you know what? I get told as a YouTuber, shut the fuck up. Bryan Kohberger pled guilty. You piece of shit. No one pleads guilty to something they didn't do. And I keep saying, make it make sense. That's all. Make it make sense. And now Howard Bloom gets to give us all permission now in America to say, you know what? We really should have some of these answers. And he even says, did police place the knife sheath? Now, he didn't say a police officer planted evidence. What he's saying is, did a police officer rearrange the bed and place the knife sheath in the picture before it was taken? He's not saying to incriminate Bryan Kohberger. It's not what he's saying. He's just saying, did they do somewhere? We need to ask the question. How'd the knife sheath get right there? Did anybody touch it? Did an officer touch it? We need to ask the question. But nobody else asked the question. Now Howard Bloom gets to ask the question.
The defense could have raised this issue of an accomplice, but again, they settled.
They did raise an issue of the accomplice. They had Brent Tarby come in and say that he thought that there was more than one accomplice. So it was brought up. You know who didn't let it go? Hitler didn't let it go. And by the way, as we finish, and I thought I would get done in an hour. There's no fucking way we're doing this in an hour. Brent Tarby's going to tell you, judges control everything. In America, you'd be stunned how much the judge can control. And that's what Brent Tarby's also going to tell you on the way out. Listen.
Why did Kohberger settle so quickly? What was he trying to protect? Did he have enough of a relationship with someone that he would want to protect them?
Yes. Yes, Howard Bloom. It's the same fucking thing I said. That's the same thing I said. When all those sons of bitches were telling me I'm a piece of shit because Bryan Kohberger pled guilty. Why would he do that, DA? Why would he plead guilty, DA? And I said, maybe he was protecting someone. Maybe he was protecting his own family who had been threatened. Maybe he was protecting himself who had been threatened. Maybe he was protecting somebody that did the crime with him and he was protecting them for some reason. Maybe he was protecting a victim in the house. Maybe he was protecting someone. I asked all those questions, but now Howard Bloom gets to act like, hey, you know what would be a really good question? To ask if maybe he was protecting someone with that plea deal. I agree. It's a great question, buddy.
Again,
they'd know if he had a relationship with somebody. That would be all over his phone.
And this, Megan, well, they would know. They would know if he had a relationship with somebody. It would be all over his phone. Are you kidding me, Megan?
There'd be eyewitnesses to that. We'd know if he were dating somebody or communicating with somebody.
We do know he was sort of dating with someone. He did have I spoke with her, someone involved a foreign student involved in the program at WSU in the criminal justice program.
Oh, I'm sorry. I cannot get through his interview. I'm sorry. Howard Bloom, I'm sorry. Dude, you clearly do not know Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger had no friends and could not get laid, and no woman liked him. He was an incel, involuntarily celibate because he can't get laid. So it can't be true. It cannot be true, Howard Bloom, that you met a girlfriend of Bryan Kohberger's and that you spoke to her personally. It can't be true because we know, Megyn Kelly would tell us, Bryan Kohberger had no friends. He had no girlfriends. He was a loser. We know this. They told us that. So how could you possibly, Howard Bloom, know that he had a girlfriend and someone who dated him? And how could you have lied, Howard Bloom? And again, I'm being sarcastic because he's right. Bryan Kohberger did have women, multiple, that were interested in him, but they told you he was an incel and had no friends because you sons of bitches out there who are guilters don't give a shit about the truth. It's just easier to say he's a fucking loser who can't get laid, and that's why he had to kill people, instead of the facts, which is that he had a girlfriend, he had somebody that wanted to date him, he went to a party at the pool party, he got women's phone numbers, he successfully got multiple phone numbers. Girls were asked why they didn't go out on a date with him, and they don't know why they didn't go out on a date with him. It wasn't because he was creepy. They're just like, I don't know why I didn't return his call. I'm glad I didn't in retrospect, but I don't know why. It's not because I thought he was creepy. No, all the shit that you were told is a lie. The guy wasn't a loser. He wasn't friendless. He had a girlfriend, all these, and he tells you, I talked to them, but you still don't listen. You still don't listen. You had your narrative. You don't give a F about anything.
And you know, it was known in certain circles, they would say, oh, she has a Kohberger. That's how they sort of made fun of her at the time or mocked her. That was her boyfriend. And there's more we're learning about Kohberger.
Yeah. Listen. Not only did he speak to Kohberger's girlfriend, so to speak, but other people had a running joke about teasing her that he was her boyfriend. So people knew he had a female. Knew it. Did you hear that, America? No, you did not. No, you did not. You heard he had no friends. Nobody liked him. He was an incel and couldn't get laid. That's what you heard. Listen. Why are you, if you were still out there in the guilt land on Bryan Kohberger, why are you still there and not asking questions? Or do you need Howard Bloom's permission? Because guess what? Here's the great part. Howard Bloom is finally giving you permission. He's finally giving you permission to fucking think a little bit. Well, you're not thinking, he's thinking for you, but he's finally giving you permission, if you're a guilter, to maybe question some of those things. And Megyn Kelly is going to go along with him. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe we should ask some of these questions. Okay.
The question is, he cleaned his phone. I think one theory would be that he wants to have the last laugh. Why did he settle? He knew he was doomed, but this is this one secret he can hold on to that will give him strength to survive, because he knows something that we don't know.
And again, here's Howard Bloom coming through with we got the right guy. We got the right guy, and part of me thinks he just wants to have the last laugh. That's why he's not telling us. He knows something we don't know, which, by the way, Howard Bloom is going to simultaneously tell us what he knows is that there was another killer there and that he gets to hide that information. But remember, Bryan Kohberger said he did it, and he did it all by himself. So why is it acceptable for anyone in this country to say Bryan Kohberger admitted to doing the crime and then say, well, he just lied about that part? Maybe he lied about doing the crime altogether, because apparently you're okay with that. Maybe he lied about doing it by himself, but he admitted he did it. But so he can be a liar in your opinion. He can maybe be a liar in your opinion and be lying about having accomplices, but the fact that he did it is not a lie, but he's proven himself to be a liar. Like, fuck, can we use any common sense at all? Let's keep going.
And why the prosecution did not press to get these issues resolved, to get answers, is something that I still find troubling.
Why didn't the prosecution ask? I find that troubling as well.
It is. I mean, when you think about it, it's the thing that troubled everybody from the beginning. And we didn't know that there were 150 total stab wounds in the beginning. We just knew that 4 people were killed in a very short time. But it's down to about 9 minutes. 150 stab wounds. And it's not gunshot. It's stabbing somebody, stabbing for somebody.
And Megyn Kelly now is going to say, oh, we just now know that it's down to about 9 minutes. Megyn Kelly, I think that you got the number 9 minutes from Howard Bloom. Howard Bloom literally just wrote the article before you had him on your show saying that I put it at about 9 minutes. So now you're saying we know it happened in about 9 minutes. No, you probably didn't know because you never questioned the narrative. You were told it was like 16 minutes originally. Then you were told it was more like 13 minutes. And now Howard Bloom is telling you it's about 9 minutes. But guess what? A bunch of us told you it was about 8 to 9 minutes a lot for years. It seems like we've been telling you there's been 8 to 9 minutes. And now you're like, well, now we know it's 8 minutes or so. Yeah, no, it's not just now. You just weren't listening because everybody wanted the answer that they got. Everybody wanted it to go away, including mainstream media. Everyone wanted it to go away.
Over the course of 9 minutes, from different room to struggles, at least 2 fought for their lives. That would have gone on.
And I love how Megyn Kelly now gets to act. She's saying the same shit that I did, but now she gets to come off like she's brilliant. 9 minutes, 4 people on 2 floors that are fighting back. How does this make sense? We didn't know all this 3 years ago. Well, we did. We did. We were asking you those questions 3 years ago when you were calling me a piece of shit. Not you personally, calling me personally a piece of shit rhetorically. Mainstream media were calling people like me pieces of shit for asking questions. And now you're going, well, we didn't know that was the short window of time. Well, no, we worked out the math a long time ago. You're just now finally doing the math. We worked out the math a long time ago. That car didn't arrive till 4:07 in the morning. That's when the lights are shown on the back side of the house. It left, the dogs start barking at 4:17. So if you do the math between 4:07 and 4:17, you're looking at like 10 minutes. That's the way that math looks to me. 10 minutes. And now you got to have walking time down to the slope into the house and walking time back out to the house. That's easily another minute gone. So now you're getting down to like 9 minutes. And now you got bloody clothes you got to change out of. Like, we did the math a long time ago. Welcome to the club.
And again, the absence of some bloody evidence that we would have expected. Yeah, I mean, these really are very good questions.
They Megan, they really were good questions 3 fucking years ago. They really were great questions before Bryan Kohberger pled guilty because he didn't get a fair trial and had to accept a plea deal. Had to, because you were going to execute him. Because those were really great questions that it would have been great if any of you in mainstream media had actually asked and put pressure on law enforcement and the prosecution to answer. Would have been great if you guys had done a job like media used to do and actually question the authorities and question the official story. It would have been great. Little late now, isn't it? Hopefully not, but probably a little late now.
And then his question was, anyone else arrested? But we're never going to know, right? Unless he gives an interview to that criminologist, Dr. Catherine Rumler from...
Oh my God, Catherine Rumland. Catherine Ramsland is what they're talking about. But and look at she's we're never going to know, are we? We're never going to know. Fuck.
His undergrad program,
right? Or he writes a
and
book,
fesses
or he talks,
everything
his
up.
sister decides to write a book, which is perhaps happening, or maybe something will come out. I don't think conspiracies can be buried forever, but we're still looking into other old conspiracies that have lingered for generations. So,
and again, so now we get to talk about the conspiracy thing, and he says, "Look, the conspiracies aren't going to die. They can't be, but they can't be buried forever." So, Howard Bloom is suggesting that some of us fucking conspiracy theorists might end up actually being right after all.
I'm going to poke around a bit more into it. I'm getting some leads to follow. Maybe they're dead ends, but I think it's important to raise these hypotheses. I mean, the search for truth is a search for greater theory.
So look, Howard Bloom is now going to start doing some research into some leads that he's getting. Good for you. If you would like, Howard Bloom, reach out to me and we'll talk about some of those leads. And if you've got some resources that I don't have, I'd love to show you the leads that you should be going down, in my personal opinion. But you're not going to reach out to me, I'm sure. But if you do, I will work with you to give you some of those leads and we'll talk. And I'm glad that you get to do that. You get to decide that you're going to go into some leads and start looking into some things that should have been asked a long time ago.
And I'm looking at new theories.
And the search for truth is the search for greater theories. Well said. And so he's going to look at new theories. And again, not a conspiracy theorist, a new hypothesis. Again, so I want to tell you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a hypothesizer. Hippopotamus. Hypothesizer. I'm a hypothesizer, like Howard Bloom. This is good enough for this interview. Let's jump over, because I did not mean to go this long, way longer than I want to. Let's jump straight into, and I was going to do a bunch more, but I just lost my mind. And I hope that the audio is still going to be sharing on this. I believe it is. So cross my fingers I don't have to redo all of this. This is the Sarge, True Crime with the Sarge, doing an interview with Brent Tarvey. This is the guy we talked about. This is the criminal forensics specialist who was brought in by Ann Taylor and Bryan Kohberger's trial, who said that in his professional opinion, this murder was done probably by multiple perpetrators using more than one weapon, probably on 2 floors at the same time. All of the things that we've been saying for forever. And now Howard Bloom is saying, you know what? It kind of looks like Mr. Tarvey, Dr. Tarvey might have been correct. But what I want you, and again, this is not I want you to, as we close, I want you to hear Tarvey's explanation of how law enforcement gets narrow-sighted, how a judge fixes a trial, and what lengths law enforcement will do to bury a story and attack the families of the victims to keep the narrative going. Listen to what he says. Doesn't have to be about Idaho 4. This all applies to Idaho 4. Listen as we ride on out with Dr. Tarvey, again, who was going to testify if this went to trial, but it was never going to go to trial because you can't hear this motherfucker talk to a jury because they'd be in trouble. All right, let's listen to what he has to say. Again, this is not about Idaho 4 specifically.
How much of this gets missed, do you think, on a daily basis in crime scene investigation?
Well, let's have some real talk about this, and that is that you and I are men who can be honest with each other, I think, on this podcast, and say that the crime scene unit is not the place where you put the best and brightest. This is where often it's the rubber gun squad for some agencies.
This guy is pure gold. Your crime scene investigators are not where you put your best and brightest, for starters. All right, let's keep going.
You know what I mean? This is a common occurrence. So that's the first thing. So the quality is not always there. In that context, even under the, so that's first hurdle to clear. You got to have good people with good relationships and good training and no politics.
And by the way, so he's talking, you need to have good investigators to start with, and that's often not the case. And now he's going to talk about how they purposely miss shit or don't investigate shit. Listen carefully.
Because the other thing that happens is it's not about getting missed. Man, I'm so glad you brought this up. It gets me upset just thinking about it. I am often the very person who will go through a victim's clothing or go through their phone, because they'll collect the clothing or they'll collect the phone, but they don't want to look at it. Why? Because once they get a suspect, the physical evidence case, we're done.
Wow. Listen, Dr. Tarvey tells you it is common practice in law enforcement and prosecution. Once you've decided who your suspect is, you don't want to ask any other questions. You don't want to test evidence. Like in this case, you don't want to test the blood on the knife sheath versus the blood on the banister versus the blood in the bloody glove outside, because you already know the killer exited the back door, and blood on the banister going out the front door, the bloody glove on the outside of the front door doesn't fit what you know happened. So you don't want to ask the question. That's exactly what Dr. Turvey is telling you is typical behavior. You stop asking questions because investigating only destroys your case. You know what happened already. You don't want to ask questions that's going to destroy your case. Let's continue.
I got a suspect now. If I start investigating the physical evidence, it will not reflect what our theory is. We know the physical evidence will absolutely come in and destroy that theory. So we have to stop the physical evidence investigation right now. That is a very common reality.
Very common reality. It is a very, look, this guy interacts with law enforcement all the time. He's written books on forensics and crime scene analysis. The guy is an expert also in sexual crimes and other things. And he's telling you it is a common practice that they stop investigating once they decide what they believe happened. Continue. Let's continue.
You can see it happen in cases. All right. So that's the next thing. Then the final thing. So that's there's a dimension of training and ignorance and politics at the crime scene inside the unit. Then there's the politics of having the prosecutor or the chief coming in and putting the big foot on somebody and tell them to do or not do stuff.
Listen, Idaho 4. So you've got untrained, not your brightest guys doing the crime scene investigation in the first place. Once they've made up their mind what happened, they stop investigating. You also have the chief and the lead prosecutor, Bill Thompson, for example, in Idaho 4, possibly. I'm just making a relation to the case, coming in and putting their boot on everybody and saying, this is what we're going with. This is what we're going to go with. They put the boot on people and stop the investigation. That's the kind of thing that happens in all kinds of cases, Dr. Turvey tells you. In all kinds of cases, he sees this happen.
And not examine evidence. But then finally, there is the court. What people do not realize is, let's say you have 100% of the evidence that's at a crime scene. Let's say of that evidence that's at the crime scene, the police will gather on a good day, they'll gather 25% of it, maybe.
So listen, he's going to tell you how the judge has a huge amount of power in the case. To start with, the investigators only process on a good day 25% of the crime scene analysis. They only do 25% of the processing. They already decide what they think happened, and then they stop asking questions or testing blood on the banister or the bloody glove outside because they don't want those answers. So they decide what they want. The killer came in. Here's what he did. He probably did this, and he walked out the back door. That's what we're going with. Well, this doesn't match. Well, we're not going to go down that road. He went out the back door. That's what we're going with. Bill Thompson said so. Chief Fry said so. Everybody said so. The boots have come down. They've told us this. And then the judge will make sure that that's what's going to happen in this case. And again, he's not even talking about Idaho 4. He's talking about this is general practice. This happens all over the place. It's not just Idaho 4, but it's exactly what I think might have happened in Idaho 4. Let's continue.
I mean, the cases I work, they leave behind bloody shoes. They leave behind the murder weapon. It's because before they get to the crime scene, they've told themselves a story about how the crime occurred, and they're only looking for that inside the scene. Or worse,
before they get to the crime scene, they've told themselves a story, and and I've told you this a million times on my rants, a million times. Gee, Why didn't they ask this? Why didn't they ask this? Why didn't they follow up on this? How did they exclude so-and-so? Why didn't they interview so-and-so? And I keep telling you, the reason being is you don't ask questions you already have the answers for, or you already know what you want the answer to be. They decided potentially, according to Dr. Turvey, and he's not even talking about Idaho 4, oftentimes they decide before they even get there what happened in the crime. And then they make it fit. And they don't want to hear any other thing. That's common practice. Let's continue.
One of the guys at the scene is one of their informants, so they don't want to jam them up. So they just only collect stuff that doesn't relate to them, and they might be the murderer. You know, that happens more often than you would think.
I literally, do you understand? Have you watched our channel? We just recently played body cam footage from an officer in Idaho 4 who went up to Lanier and said, hey, I don't know if you know this. This was when they first arrived on crime scene. Hey, I'm going to give you an update on this crime scene. I don't know if you know this, but one of the victims was a CI. Confidential informant. One of the victims was a CI. That's caught on camera, being told to an officer kind of in a hush-hush, hey, I don't know if you know this, but one of the victims is a CI. He literally says, sometimes you go into a crime scene and you know that one of the people there is one of your confidential informants and you don't want to get your informant jammed up, so you just kind of tell a different story. And he laughs about it. You know, maybe you have your confidential informant, you don't want to get them jammed up, so you go with a different story. This is something Dr. Turvey said happens all the time across law enforcement everywhere. Everywhere, not just in Idaho. Did it happen here too? I think so. I do think so. Dr. Turvey, unfortunately, doesn't get to have a chance to tell his story about what he sees in all kinds of cases, which is what he's telling Sarge here in this interview. Yeah, the confidential informant, they don't want to jam up, and they work with him to let the murderer go free, which sometimes the confidential, I think he just said, I could back it up. I think he just said sometimes the confidential informant is the murderer. Sometimes, and they don't want to jam him up or her up. They don't want to jam up their confidential informant. So sometimes, and yes, read the book Framed by John Grisham, where sometimes the actual murderer works with the police department to frame someone who didn't do the crime. Sometimes the murderer works with the police department to frame someone who didn't do the crime. And they'll do that. And that's what he just told you. It's not fiction, people. Read the book Framed. That's not a fiction book. Dr. Turvey is not telling you fiction. This is how shit works in America. Wake the fuck up. Listen.
So then, so you have that, you have the next part, but the final part is the court. So 100% of what's at the crime scene, 25% gets collected. Of the 25%, of that 25%, this new segment, maybe 5% gets tested and examined.
And this is what he's going to tell you. And I don't say this enough in my case. What gets presented to a jury is so little compared to what we actually know. The jury doesn't see hardly dick. They don't see shit. The jury sees very, very little. Lots of stuff is fought over in the back and forth. Well, the jury shouldn't see this and the jury shouldn't see this, and they shouldn't know that so-and-so had a criminal history because that might prejudice them. Okay, that's approved. The jury doesn't hear the facts in the case. They hear very, very limited. So what he's telling you is an argument. Look, to start with, 25% of the crime scene was collected on a good day, 25%. And of that, very little of it actually gets into the courtroom. That's the truth. Let's continue.
Of that percentage that gets tested and examined, the judge will allow admissibility of only a fraction of that.
So look, of the 25% of the stuff that actually gets looked at. So you have 100% evidence at a crime scene. Only 25% of it actually gets collected. Of that 25%, very small amount of that actually gets tested. Like, for example, the blood that didn't get tested on the banister, or the blood that didn't get tested on the bloody glove because they determined that it's not relevant. We don't need to test that. So very little of the crime scene actually gets tested. They just test the button sheath. Can we get Kohberger's DNA on that button sheath? Nice fucking snap shit. Let's just get just enough of the crime scene processed where we can tell a story. And of that little bit they decide to test, of the 25% of the crime scene, 75% of it fucking going out the window, of the 25% that they decide to look at, very little of that gets tested, and then the judge doesn't even allow most of that to come in. All right.
So what a jury sees bears no resemblance whatsoever to what's happened at the crime scene. So until you appreciate that and understand that, to me, you're not really a serious criminal justice professional.
What the jury actually sees is nothing close to the actual crime scene. And until you understand that, you are not a criminal justice professional. All right, let's continue.
It's the fantasy we have that the police went and they collected everything and they tested everything and everything's coming in and the jury's making an informed decision. That's fantasy land.
It is fantasy. Dr. Turvey, an expert who writes books and college courses, read his books, tells you it's a fantasy that the police did a proper and thorough investigation and that people were convicted on the facts. That is a fantasy.
Okay.
So I got a good question here from Blue Bear Art. Says, Joe, can you ask how helpful or not can family be in helping or pushing the police and detectives to help solve the crime?
And we could spend all day with Dr. Turvey, but this is where we're going to end right now. Not right now, but we're going to end with his response. Listen to Dr. Turvey tell you, or Turvey. I keep saying Turvey. I think they say Tarvey. Shit, I don't mean to disrespect the guy. What the fuck? How do you pronounce his last name? I think it's Turvey. It's Turvey. I don't know. Anyways, the point being, listen to what he says, because the shocker is this part. And it explains, in my opinion, a theory that I've had about Steve Gonzalez. I've said Steve Gonzalez has the markings of somebody who was told by law enforcement or FBI, Steve, trust us. We got this guy. We're going to do it. You just need to sit back and let us do our job. But at times, Steve felt that they weren't doing their job, that they were ruling out people too quickly, that they weren't thoroughly investigating it. So that he would go get a private investigator and start asking his own questions. And then he would go on shows and he'd be like, I'm not just going to sit by and let you guys tell me what happened in this case. I'm going to hire my own investigator. And then he got threatened and he got told again, dude, shut the fuck up. We got this. You need to relax. They buddy up with him. At times, maybe they even win over his affection and say, look, trust us. Okay. So they get somebody who gets his trust, and then he starts changing his story again for a while. Okay, I'm going to let you guys do your job. And then he loses trust. This explains a lot of his behavior, in my opinion. Dr. Turvey is going to tell you, not only do they do that, do they buddy up with the family and they basically say, trust us, bro, we got this, don't say shit. But they will go as far as arresting family members of victims to keep them to shut their fucking mouth up, to harass them and intimidate them and arrest them, making false charges against them, anything they can do to keep the families, their mouth shut, because they have a story they want to tell. That's what Dr. Turvey is going to tell you on our closing thought. Let's continue.
Oh, such a great question. I've actually taught family members on this, because family members, they form coalitions or groups, especially in places where there's a lot of corruption or a lot of negligence or what have you.
And let's just sit with that for a minute. In places that have a lot of corruption and negligence, sit with that for a little bit. So what he's going to say is families have a lot of power. Families can demand answers that nobody else can demand. The problem is when your families stop asking questions because they've been told by police to stop asking questions, or they've been buddied up to by police to say, trust us, bro, we got this. Or maybe they got an incentive with the lawsuit saying you're going to threaten your own lawsuit if you keep asking questions. Or maybe they're intimidated and you'll actually go to jail if you keep asking questions and raising and violating the gag order. Whatever the case may be, they lean on the families, but the families have a lot of power if they question. Problem is when they stop questioning, everyone's fucked because they're the one with the power.
And the other, let's lump in not only families but activists. All right,
and that's what we are. So not only, I love this. Brent Turvey is saying, look, the people who have power are the families and activists. We are the activists. We are the people asking questions that the family is apparently not asking anymore, that mainstream media is not asking. And he's saying we do have power. The activists have power. Listen.
There's a lot of activist groups out there that push for justice in cases that haven't been investigated or been investigated improperly. It's tremendous.
Like the Innocence Project and stuff like that. He's probably talking about those kind of activists. Also, maybe people like us.
In a case where there's not a lot of, where there's a, let me use a big word. It's not that big. It's called necropolitics.
And I love him explaining necropolitics. We're going to stay with Dr. Turvey long enough for him to explain necropolitics, his word for it, and how law enforcement and prosecution puts pressure on the families and harasses and intimidates them to shut the fuck up and go with the narrative that they've decided they're going to go with.
Necropolitics is the concept that the state has the ability to decide who gets resources and who doesn't, and who lives and who dies. Necropolitics.
Yeah, necropolitics. The state gets to decide who lives and who dies, who gets funding, and all those things. That's what he's going to explain. The state, the prosecution monster, the juggernaut, the FBI, the Idaho State Police, Moscow, the state of Idaho, they have the power to decide who lives and dies, who gets funding, where the money goes. They have that power. It's necropolitics. Let's continue.
What cases we're going to investigate? Let's say we have a group of prostitutes that's being killed in Chicago, like right now. Are we going to call it a serial murder? Nah, we don't need to, because nobody's really giving us a lot of heat on that. Nobody's pushing back. The press isn't covering it. There's no family members what to speak of, because 80% of the prostitutes come from, foster care system. So there's nobody really there demanding justice. So we can put those cases on the back burner.
So again, he's just talking bluntly. They get to decide how they're going to couch the narrative. The politicians, the powers that be, get to decide how they're going to spin the narrative. Is anybody going to pay attention? Nah, nobody's going to pay attention to this. We'll just call it this. It doesn't have to be the truth. We're just going to call it this. Fucking nobody's going to care. It's prostitutes or whatever the case may be. They get to decide the necropolitics. They get to decide how this is going to be framed.
All right. This is necropolitics in action. Whenever a group that's being hurt is not cared about by the community, nothing really gets done. And that's because of the politics that are involved. So when you have a case where the police are made a lot of mistakes, or where they're not putting a lot of effort, or they're not actually doing their job, the family has the only power to come forward.
When you have a case when police are not doing their job, like not following up properly on alternative suspects, not asking relevant questions to the witness, like, wait a minute, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you call 911 for 8 hours? When police aren't doing their jobs and asking the basic questions. And look, on our show, Crimes After Dark, you should know we have NYPD police officer who consults with us and talks to us. And he's like, that investigation was horseshit from the beginning. They didn't ask a million questions that any common idiot would ask. They didn't ask. And I countered, you don't ask questions that you already know the answers to, or you don't ask questions that you don't want the answers to. That's why they didn't ask those questions. Let's continue.
And it's because this is true. Police agencies will often have somebody who sidles themselves up with the family to keep them quiet. Okay, now we're friends. We're doing this for you. It's going to be helpful.
Listen carefully. The families are the only ones who have the real power. And so because of that, law enforcement saddles up with the family and buddies up with them to try to win their trust and get them to shut the fuck up on their investigation. Listen.
The biggest thing you can do right now is just keep your cool, not say anything, don't do any reviews, don't cause any problems. What they mean is don't cause problems for us, because we're not doing our job. So, don't say anything, don't do anything, keep your mouth shut. That is the biggest mistake that families make.
Are you listening to Dr. Turvey? Are you listening? I'm telling you, this is exactly what we see, and this is exactly what I see playing out in Idaho 4. Law enforcement got to some of the families and said, "Trust us, bro. We got this. We got the guy. We got the guy. You could trust us. The best thing you can do right now is shut the fuck up. Don't go on TV. Don't talk to nobody. Don't ask questions, and don't get in the way. Let us do our job. Don't get in the way of our job. We've got a guy that we want for us. We're going to make him go down. Don't get in the way of that job. We're going to get him. So trust us. We've picked who we want. He's going to go down for it. The best thing you can do is shut the fuck up." Let's continue.
Families have the only right to come forward and to speak to the press and say, my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife deserves justice. And that's, police agencies lose their mind when that happens, because now they got to do their work. So yeah, absolutely.
And look, in Idaho 4, the families were robbed. They were robbed of that right. They have the families have the right to ask questions. And the judges, collectively in this case, told the families, you were under a gag order. You're not allowed to talk to the press. And some of them figured out that that's unconstitutional. You can't tell me I can't talk to the press. So If I have to talk to the press to get you to do your fucking job, I will. And some of the family members did that. And kudos to them. I was all for that. That's why at times I'm very, very very vocal family members who said, screw you guys. I'm not going to shut the fuck up. It's my family. It's my daughter. I paid that bill. I'm going to talk. And I fucking support that all day long and twice on Sunday.
It is not only effective, it is not only necessary, it is, in my opinion, vital when an investigation is gone off the rails or has become too political. Does that make sense, or am I being too?
No, that makes perfect sense. And it's important. I mean, and you can apply that to several cases, including the Long Island serial killer case, where.
And I believe Bryan Kohberger's case did get political and go off the rails, and it's vital that the families speak out and question things. But they were attempted to be gagged. They were legally threatened with gag orders, potential penalties or whatever if they continue to talk. At times they broke those things. But this is exactly what happened. And like I said, law enforcement hates it when the families exercise their right to talk to the press and ask questions.
Shannon Gilbert's mother was, and the attorney, John Ray, were the ones that kept that case, front and center for 10 or 11 years before things happened.
They always are. And it's always against angry police who are screaming at them to shut up. Or even what'll happen in some places, and I'm not saying all, but I'm saying some, the police will actually do more investigating the family to arrest them, to silence them, than they will to investigate.
And I love that.
The crime.
Angry police who scream at the victims' families to shut up. These are we who ask the questions on behalf of the families are shamed and belittled by mainstream media and law enforcement, while law enforcement's yelling at the families to shut the hell up and quit talking to us and quit talking to the media and quit making their jobs difficult, because they've decided who's going to get arrested for it and who's going down.
Especially if, like, I had a case in Juarez one time I was working where the serial rapist was a police officer, a brother-in-law of a police officer. And what did they do? They knew who it was. They had the DNA. They didn't want to arrest the guy. So they just started arresting the family members who were protesting and going on the media.
Did you listen? A police officer or brother of a police officer was doing serial rape, and they didn't want to arrest him because he's a friend of the department. They don't want to arrest him. So what they did instead is the victims' families who had been raped, they went after and arrested and harassed the families of the victims because they don't want to arrest a cop's brother or investigate him. And yet I get called, and this is it. I'm done. I can't rant anymore. My head's going to explode. I've got a headache. I'm pissed off. I'm angry. You probably checked out a long time ago. End on this thought. Go watch that interview with the Sarge, if you will. It's right there. Dr. Brent Turvey, Turvey, crime scene analyst from the True Crime with Sarge. Hopefully Sarge doesn't bust me for borrowing so much of his video. Hopefully Megyn Kelly doesn't bust me for borrowing so much of the video. The reason why I talked all over their fucking videos is to avoid copyright restrictions, because fair use allows me to use stuff as long as I'm putting my own spin on it and I'm telling you what I think about it. I'm allowed to do that. That's called fair use. That doesn't stop these people from filing a complaint against me. So I hope, Sarge, I have nothing against you at all. In fact, I'm trying to get Dr. Turvey to come on with me. I can't even pronounce his name right. That's not going to go well. I'm going to try to get Dr. Turvey to go on my show as well. They probably won't, but he is talking to people who are on YouTube instead of mainstream media. So why not? I'm trying to get him on. So let's see if we can get him. The point being is that we've been shamed in America for asking the questions. And that in itself is shameful. Watch this. So, go check out his show. Go check out the full interview. That's just scratching the surface. Again, this was Brent Turvey on screen, was the defense's one of the defense's witnesses. And as I go full screen, I'm into with this. If you're still guilty after listening to all this, I don't know what to tell you. But for the first time, I'm going to end where I started. For the first time since Bryan Kohberger pled guilty, I'm beginning to think we might actually see something happen. I have hope for the first time, because now finally someone like Howard Bloom is letting somebody like Megyn Kelly go, maybe we should have asked more questions in the beginning. And Dr. Turvey is going and doing the rounds and saying, you know what? They always railroad people, and they always tell the families to shut the hell up. And they will even work with the murderer sometimes to help put somebody else away for the crime because they don't want to make the arrest or give up their confidential informant. That's what he told you. Listen carefully. Thanks and have a good day.